Good evening, everybody. We are here with another presentation for the GOSA Winter Presentation Series. We are with Suzanne Strasser and Heinrich Koenig, and they are going to be presenting about their trip to New Zealand and seeing some of the geysers there. And as a reminder, we are doing these presentations weekly here on Tuesdays. We have a few more coming up. Our next one is going to be Mara Reed talking about some long-term monitoring, I believe that they've done with in Norris Geyser Basin and with Steamboat. So with that, we will get right to it and take it away with Suzanne and Heinrich.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation. Suzanne and I've been geyser gazing in Yellowstone every year since 1975. My co-presenter Heinrich first came to Yellowstone in the summer of 1980, and we met at Grand Geyser that year during a very memorable 8-burst eruption. We're both retired now, and the extra time has allowed us to venture out to visit some other geyser areas. We were able to make 2 long visits to New Zealand, the first in January of 2019, and again in March of 2023. I'd like to acknowledge the geyser gazers that made trips to New Zealand before our first visit and provided us with tips and information on what to look for in the various geyser areas. Tara Cross, Mara Reed, and Dimitri Stumbos. And I'd also like to acknowledge the geyser gazers that made trips more recently after we did, Graham Meach in November of 2023, and Beatrice and Henning Risk in February of 2024. They provided more recent observations, photos, and a video that's included in this presentation. This presentation is meant to be an overview of the various thermal areas that you can visit on a trip to New Zealand. We're not going to have time to go into a lot of details for any one area, but we'd like to give you an idea of what's available to see in the various areas so that you can make an informed decision on where to spend your time. And if a trip to New Zealand is not in your immediate future, it's our hope that it will serve as a mini travel tour. We will talk about both paid admission areas and several free areas to visit. And at the end, we will include some links to references that go into much more detail. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation. And a disclaimer, the prices, hours, and information given in this talk is from our visits and observations in 2019 and 2023, and it's subject to change. So be sure to check on the current state of affairs when you're planning your own trip. But first, let's talk about the differences between New Zealand and Yellowstone. You may have already seen from this presentation cover photo how much more plant life and vegetation there is. The plant life can be very, very thick in areas. New Zealand does not have any native land mammals. There's no marmots, squirrels, elk, bears, or wolves. And any small mammals that you might see, such as stoats and ferrets, were all introduced by English settlers, and they're now considered to be pests because they are threats to many of the native bird species. The natives are birds, penguins, and lots of noisy cicadas. And at the ocean, we have fur seals, sea lions, dolphins, and whales. Pay to visit. The major thermal areas all have admission fees, and most are for a daily rate. There's no annual or multi-day passes, although sometimes you can get a discount by booking online ahead of time. We average at about a 10% discount by paying ahead of time. Limited hours. Most paid areas are open daytime only, which rules out nighttime geyser sits. And cultural. New Zealand's harness the geothermal energy from the hot springs. The bottom 2 photos are examples of cooking. On the left, we have a hangi. By definition, a hangi is an earth oven that the Maori people used to cook food with steam and heat from heated stones. Here, they've dug a pit and they're using the geothermal heat from below. On the right, they have just finished boiling sweet corn in the hot spring, and they're removing the basket. This was during our paid tour at Whakarearea, and we each got to sample the corn afterwards. Following up from the previous slide, The bottom left photo shows another example of hangi at Tokanu. Other differences. There are many boardwalks with steps, and they usually are covered with chicken wire. That was a really nice feature that helped with traction. We did not worry so much about it being slippery when wet. The bottom right photo shows a boardwalk with chicken wire. The FRS radios that we use in the United States will interfere with the New Zealand emergency service channels, and that's going to get you into a lot of trouble. So please leave them at home or buy radios certified to work in New Zealand.
A quick note about pronunciation, not that we're experts. In Te Reo Maori, the Maori language, all syllables have the form of an optional consonant, a vowel, and then an optional vowel. There are no exceptions. This makes deciphering those long names a little bit easier. NG is pronounced as in singer with a soft G, not as in finger with a hard G. And it starts a syllable, it doesn't end one. WH is pronounced as an F, not as a W or a WH. That's whaka, not waka. Many of the names for features are descriptive, and here are a few common words that we see used in thermal names, especially Y, water, and roto, lake. The map on the left shows the locations of the features we will discuss. Many are grouped in the Taupo volcanic zone, starting at Tongariro National Park in the south and heading northwest towards Rotorua and beyond. An outlier is Te Aroha, the location of a warm, gas-driven artificial geyser. The map on the right is a close-up showing the location of the major thermal areas southwest of Rotorua. It's about a 2.5-hour drive from Auckland to Rotorua, and it sounds like cruise ships operate out of Tauranga on the Bay of Plenty, which is a fair distance away.
We'll start with our recommended 2 top places to visit. Te Puia is one of the more expensive areas to visit, but it's worth a full day, which gives the opportunity to see a concentration of New Zealand's major geysers. At many places, the geysers can be viewed close to the vent, and there are multiple viewpoints for them. Orake Korako is also worth a full day. It's another paid area. In many ways, it's more similar to Yellowstone with multiple terraces to visit. There are smaller geysers, but a lot of them. It can be a really fun place to hang out and collect data. Te Puia. On this slide and those following for the other major areas, we will be listing the current cost information and hours of operation. Please note that this could be subject to change at any time. And we're also going to include our minimum recommended time to visit, the website for more information, and if it's not in Rotorua, the driving distance time from Rotorua. It makes some sense to make Rotorua the base place to stay for many of these areas. Taupo would be another good place since it's about an hour south of Rotorua and it's closer to Orake Korako. Currently, 5 major geysers are active, and we will be talking about each one. Try to arrive early in the day, since Te Puia is currently one of the places that requires you to go on a 1.5-hour tour before they will let you spend the rest of the day on your own visiting the geysers. The tour requirement may be subject to change in the future. In 2019, we were not required to take a tour, and we could go out directly to visit the geysers. But when we went in 2023, the majority of the time on the tour was spent touring the Maori Arts and Crafts Institute, and the geyser area was at the very end. We also got there later than we wanted because the first tour was already sold out when we tried to book it the night before. On a future visit, we would try to reserve the tour farther in advance to be able to secure the first tour of the day. When Graham visited last November, his tour visited the geyser area first, and he was able to talk the tour guide into letting him stay at the geysers. He was also wearing a Steamboat Geyser t-shirt, so that may have helped. Your luck may vary. This map shows the location of many of the more interesting thermal features at Te Puia and Whakarearea. These are 2 separate paid areas, even though they are adjacent to one another. So plan on a separate day to visit Whakarearea if you have the time. We will talk more about that area later. There are some mud pots that you can view for free. The Mead Street mud pot, which is located at the top of this map, broke out next to some houses in 2020, and it was active again in 2023 after we left. The most famous geyser to see at Te Puia is Pohutu. Statistics on this page list the interval as variable. In 2019 and 2023, it was erupting more frequently, every few hours. But then in February of 2024, it was much less frequent. Beatrice and Henning saw only one eruption on the day of their visit. A cause could be that Pohutu is connected to many other geysers that influence its behavior. You do have some warnings since Te Tohu, which is also known as Prince of Wales Feathers, always erupts before Pohutu starts. So Te Tohu is the indicator geyser for Pohutu. Te Tohu translates to the marker. The yellow icons on this map show the various places you can view Pohutu, both free and paid areas, which we will discuss in the next few slides. When we heard that the hotel overlooking the geyser area had been torn down, we hoped that that meant there might be another free viewing area from Hemo Road. Unfortunately, they just extended the fence and blocked the view. At Fenton Street, which is located near the top of this map, there were some rocks big enough for maybe 2 people to stand on, and we could look over the fence and see Pohutu. We did see it once from there, but we don't have any pictures. Here's a video. The location is very good. This is the area the tour guides give their talk about the geyser. Te Tohu and Prince of Wales Feathers is visible to the left in this video. The next viewpoint is to the south of Pohutu near Mahanga Geyser. In this video, Mahanga is the yellowish mound on the left. This is the view from Paparia Village, the other paid area. It's a more distant view, but worthwhile. In the background, you can hear the noise of the cicadas. The people in the distance are at Te Puia at the bridge overlook, and the building in the distance is the Maori Arts and Crafts Institute. Whakaria Forest Overlook. This is a free view, and it's much farther away. You have to hike it about a half hour to 45 minutes through a redwood forest to get there. It's a really nice hike and view if you can spare the time to do it. Bring binoculars if you have them.
Carol?
As a bonus, as you just heard, we also saw Cararoo erupt from there, and we're going to discuss that geyser next. In a future visit, I'd like to go back to this area in the early morning or late evening to see it in different lighting conditions and when the paid area is closed. And this is a fun view from our B&B. We were fortunate to be staying only about 1 mile from Pohutu as the crow flies. And this is the view of the geyser steam from the hot tub. Occasionally, we saw a few jets of water. Cararoo is a fantastic geyser to see, but you do need to have some luck to catch a major eruption or be willing to wait for it for a while. It doesn't have any known connections to nearby geysers. Both in 2019 and 2023, it was quiet for a few hours when we arrived, and then suddenly it had a major, followed by periodic minors. The minors were most with a height of 1 to 2 meters. Subsequent majors would then start after a stronger than normal minor. We thought it was actually a good sign if we saw the geyser completely quiet, meaning that it was probably between series and could possibly start a new series at any time. This next video is of Cararoo taken in 2019. The steam to the far right is from Te Tohu in eruption. This was taken from the bridge overlook.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Mahanga is directly to the south of Pohutu, and you can get quite close to it on the walkway. It was a frequent performer, one of the smaller geysers, but if it is still active, you should have several chances to see it while you were there. It reactivated in late 2022, shortly before our visit. Waikorohihi was not active when we were there, but Beatrice and Henning were fortunate enough to see it in February of 2024, since it had just reactivated after a long dormancy. The statistics listed here are from their observations. There is a loop trail about a half-mile long that you can walk around to view many other features, including geysers that are not currently active, several hot springs, and mud pots. We spent about an hour. This photo is of Waikiki. Other geysers you will pass are Wairoa, Peihoru, and Papakura. None were active at the time of our visit. As you can see from the statistics, Wairoa was quite large. It was the size of Grand. Also of note, a fun non-geyser activity at Te Puia is the kiwi house. Kiwi birds are nocturnal, so they're hard to see in the wild. The paid tour went to the kiwi house, but it was crowded then and I had limited time. I went back there on my own in between Kararu eruptions, and I had the place all to myself in between the tours coming through, and that was really cool.
At Orake Koroko, before Lake Oahe filled in 1961, there are over 100 geysers. Most of the large geysers located near the river were flooded by the filling of the lake. Minigui, Mimi Homai Omai Tarangi, and Tarata erupted to about 20 to 25 meters. Rahu Rahu erupted to 40 to 50 meters, and the Orake Koroko geyser itself erupted to over 60. There are still over 30 known geysers on the terraces, but none reached those heights. And just as a note, there are no facilities on the thermal side of the lake. This is a satellite map showing the visitor center on the west side of Lake Oahe. The large geysers were located to the north of the visitor center. Southeast of the Artist's Palace terrace, there were some mud pots in the Ruhapea thermal cave. The cave is a deep hole with a warm spring hidden in the alcove in the bottom. Here's a drone photo taken from another website, which I've annotated showing many of the notable features of the Rainbow Terrace. Diamond Geyser is dormant. It is a cone a couple of meters high, and when active could erupt to 3 or 4 meters. Next to it is bush. We didn't notice it our first trip, and it was barely visible the second. Mostly it splashed up to the rim, making lots of noise in the process. Soda Fountain, just off the top edge of this map, is an ornate boiling spring which can have periods of dormancy and deep drains. A couple of years after the lake filled, Aorangi erupted to about 20 meters high for a couple of years. It's not been active since then. There's also an overlook to the left of Aorangi below the bottom of this overlook. Sapphire Geyser has slightly irregular intervals during both visits. Cascade Geyser is the opening to the right with the pink runoff channel coming down from it. We got longer durations for Cascade when we observed it from the overlook, probably because you can see down into the opening better from up there than when you're standing below on the boardwalk. This is a panorama series showing the middle terrace, the Golden Fleece Terrace. The top left shows where a boardwalk had to be relocated due to some breakouts. Then there's a railing around Fred and Maggie Spring, the only spring in the middle of the terrace. Below, the photos show the flat in front of the Golden Fleece Scarp. The pool at the base of the scarp on the right is Cauldron, with Dreadnought Geyser hidden behind the plant life. That part of the scarp has several geysers. Graham saw a small one erupting at the back near Cauldron. The pool at the front is Manganese, while Wairiri is back nearer the scarp. In the 4 years between our visits, Manganese went from a cool, scummy hole to an erupting feature. We saw mostly continuous boiling to over a meter in 2023, while Graham saw it periodically erupting up to 2 meters high, and the activity had forced the boardwalk to be relocated. At the top of this is a photo of a paper published in 2014. They were looking for warm ground, and one of the areas of interest was a stretch of boardwalk southwest of Manganese. The lower photos show what we saw 5 years later. There were 4 vents in the 3 craters, and the boardwalk had been relocated back, including a necessary splashboard. The difference in heights of the terrace there seems to be due to carving of the runoff channels next to the boardwalk on this terrace. Here are the 4 vents in action. None erupted to maybe more than a meter or so high, but droplets were hitting the splashboard attached to the railing. We weren't able to get much in the way of statistics here. It was quite variable activity. Here's another borrowed drone view, this one of the artist's palette. The water level here varies, and this is how the area looks when the water is high and all the features are overflowing and flooded. Just about every labeled vent here has been known to erupt at some point. Palette Pool, the largest blue feature, has been known to erupt as much as 8 meters high. Our 2 visits were during times of low water level, so we didn't get to see the colorful terrace in the previous photo. I've seen online reports that the water level was high again about 8 months after our 2019 visit. This panorama is from the 2023 visit. The water level was even lower than it was in 2019. Number 773 here was more heard than seen. That's number 772 out on the flat. Number 812 in 2019 was a thin perpetual spouter, a few meters high, at the base of the pyramid of geysers. Explosion craters and breakouts are not unknown up here. Based on the map, I think this feature erupting is newer, while number 786 is the large feature just behind it. Number 764 was the largest feature we saw erupting in 2019. It was about 2 or 3 meters high and lasted about 5 minutes. We only saw it once. It was quite steamy during most of the eruption. Square Pool had frequent horizontal jetting in 2019. In 2023, it was one of the few pools that had a higher water level, and we didn't see this activity then. Finally, number 737 was the one periodic feature we saw in 2023. Every few minutes, the continuous splashing would get stronger, and for about 30 seconds, it could reach a height of about 2 meters. It was pretty far away, so it was hard to see. We didn't see an eruption of Kurupai, which is a hot spring which has been enhanced to become a geyser. It's better seen from across the lake, as this photo by Henning shows. Because Kurupai can be seen from the parking lot, in the future we might consider hanging around there after closing time in hopes of seeing an eruption. It also seems like the visits to Oraki Korako ended too soon. If we had the time and opportunity, I could see us spending a second day there, especially if artist's palette is up high and showing signs of more activity. Waimangu has the longest hikes, but fortunately you can use the shuttle bus to get out and back. There are designated stops and a timetable in the handout. Also, there was the Mount Hazard side trail, which was supposed to go high up to some viewpoints. The trail had lots of steps, and when we got to the viewpoints, they were overgrown with not much of a view. Thermal activity here started with the eruption of Mount Tarawiwa on the night of 10 June 1886. The eruption lasted only 6 hours, but by dawn it created a series of craters west from the summit. It also dammed the outlet to Rotomahana, raising the water level and increasing the size of the lake. This flooded out the sites of the pink and white terraces, Te Otuka Pua Rangi and Te Tarata, which had already been covered by ash from the eruption. The map here shows some of the craters, which have become the sites of hot springs. It also shows the trails, the bus route in green, and the location of the boat dock, which we'll get to later. Also, there are indoor plumbing facilities at Warbrick Terrace, about a ½ kilometer from the boat dock. The largest spring here is Frying Pan Lake, perhaps the largest spring in the world. Next to it is Waimangu. In the early years of the 20th century, it erupted frequently to as much as 300 meters high. It was known for its black, muddy water. Why water? Mangu black, and gave the area its name. Its modern appearance was a complete surprise. It is completely filled in. Now off to the left, along the Hot Creek, which drains Frying Pan Lake, is an extensive area of sputs, which may be an expression of the thermal area from Waimangu, thermal energy from Waimangu. Also, as this picture shows, the vegetation isn't quite as thick over the former crater site as elsewhere. Inferno Crater is just downstream from the site of Waimangu. It is perched up above Hot Creek and is a huge crater that fluctuates with a regular cycle lasting about 30 to 38 days. It comes up to overflow and pours water down its runoff channel for a couple of days. Then the water drops as much as 6 meters before slowly refilling. Both times we were there, we saw it in its lower phase. In 2023, there was at least one sputterer in the back rim with a height of about 1 meter. Below Inferno Crater, there are numerous sputs along the Hot Creek, including Bird's Nest, a thin perpetual spouter that erupts to several meters, Clamshell Spring, and some spouters even over by the bus stop bridge. Looks like there should be some periodic features of the geysers here, and maybe a future visit we could spend more observation time to see if that's true. Iodine Spring is a bit hard to see. It's located next to the bus road, but that bus road is posted off limits to pedestrians. The trail is about 50 meters away, so magnification helps to see it. On the left is a thin, steamy spouter, reaching about 3 meters. The pool on the right is the geyser proper. We saw intervals of about 8 minutes, Graham saw about 7 minutes. Supposedly it also thumps during the eruptions. Roto Mahana, Roto for lake, Mahana for warm, was smaller before the Tararua eruption. Now it's almost 10 times larger. Along the northwestern shore are a series of thermal areas above some of the flooded volcanic craters, including the steaming cliffs shown here. Yes.
I'm going to let you take a picture, okay?
Yes, I am. This is the Angel Wings Formation, one of the weirder formations you'll see anywhere. Consider also that it's less than 150 years old. There are numerous spouters here, and the Angel Wings geyser erupts off to the left, but we didn't see it. The water level in the lake varies, and activity varies with it. Most of the activity is concentrated in a band about 2 meters above the lake level, with higher features going dormant as lower ones are exposed and begin erupting. The guides just called this the geyser, while some reports call it the Pink Terrace Geyser, as it is near the site of the Pink Terrace. On the boat tour, we got to see a distant eruption while heading out, and one closer on the way back. But the boat started leaving before that eruption was over. On our second trip, we kayaked out and saw 4 eruptions up close and several more from a distance. There was only one other person in the group besides, and fortunately, she didn't seem to mind our wanting to hang around here to see this geyser. Off screen to the right is Upton Geyser, which is one of those features that needs a low water level to be active. When it's active, it's been reported as being even taller than the Pink Terrace Geyser. Boat ride or kayak. It all depends on what you want, how much you want to spend, both in time and money, and how much you are willing to exert yourself. On the boat, you'll probably see one eruption of the geyser nearby and maybe one on the way out from a distance. With a kayak, we were out there for about an hour. I've never been in a kayak before, but we did manage to make it back, although a bit wet and sunburned. But it was well worth the time and expense. It's also the best way to see those features up close. And we've already decided that we want to kayak out again if we ever make another trip.
The next major area is Waiatapu. It's about a 25-minute drive south of Rotorua. We recommend at least a half day, and a full day would be good for one or more chances to see Waiatapu Geyser erupt. You don't have to take a tour here, so you're on your own to visit the features. The Waiatapu Reserve Area is about a 2.1 kilometer loop walk. Waiatapu is known for its many craters, very colorful hot springs, and Lady Knox Geyser, which is induced to erupt daily at 10:15 a.m. by soaping the geyser. We recommend that you arrive early, especially if you want to see Waiatapu Geyser. You can walk out to the overlook for Waiatapu and check the level in the pool. If the pool is empty, an eruption is several hours away. But if it's full and overflowing, it could erupt soon, meaning sometime in the next few hours. Then you will need to make a decision on whether or not to see Lady Knox, which is located in a separate area, and you have to drive a short distance to get to it. If you decide to skip seeing Lady Knox, you will have the reserve almost all to yourself for over an hour. After Lady Knox erupts, everybody heads back into the reserve all at once, and it can get quite crowded. This is a detailed map of the Waiatapu Reserve, with the blue icons showing various named features and the red line showing the trail. Artist Palette and Champagne Pool are located near the center of the loop trail. Champagne is a huge, beautiful pool. Devil's Cave was one of my favorites with its striking green color. It's even brighter and even almost fluorescent in sunlight. The location of Waiatapu Geyser is also shown here, and we'll talk about that next. Waiatapu is the only geyser that was erupting naturally while we were there, and it's a small geyser with a height of about 2 meters. We were able to see it erupt late afternoon in 2019 after waiting for about 2 hours for it near the end of the day. We watched the water level in the pool slowly rise, and then it overflowed for about 45 minutes before it erupted. First, it had a small minor eruption, and then 10 minutes later, we saw the major. It's had known eruptions since the 1950s. Here's our video of its eruption in 2019. This is what it looked like when the pool was filling. And this is what it looked like immediately prior to the major eruption. And finally, the eruption. And the eruption from a different perspective. And here it is post-eruption, empty crater and noisy. If you walk up seeing it like this, you've just missed it. In 2019, we were able to view Waiatapu up close since it's right next to the trail. But in 2023, the Alum Cliffs Trail was closed due to a washout. These photos show the alternate viewing spot from an overlook. It's at marker number 9, panorama view on the latest version of the trail guide. In the photo on the left, the vent is located just above the 4th railing on the left. Binoculars would help here since it's much farther away. Graham was able to catch 2 eruptions from here in November of 2023. If you decide to visit Lady Knox, this is what you will see. In 2019, the eruption we saw lasted for 45 minutes. It was still erupting when we left. But when Beatrice and Henning visited in 2024, the entire eruption lasted only about 3 minutes, so the durations are quite variable. It's interesting to note that Lady Knox can erupt naturally on its own when it's not been induced for several days.
So I'll put that soap in and I will explain why. Back in the late 1800s, there was a came to visit the prison camp. And of course he brought his lovely daughter, Lady Constance Knox. And she christened the geyser after herself.
Here's a list of some of the other paid areas with thermal features and activity. The higher on the list, the more interesting we thought it would be. At Whakariwa, there are multiple options for the tours. We recommend buying the combo package and, like at Te Puia, starting early. A tour is the only way to visit the village proper. Then you also get access to the overlook to view Pahutu, as well as access to the thermal boardwalks around Roto a Tamaheki. It also includes the cultural exhibits if you're interested in those things. On the village tour, you will get to see the springs and their modifications up close. The tour ends at the overlook for Pahutu, and you can spend as much time there as you like. The geothermal walkway gives you access to the boardwalks and features around Roto a Tamaheki. There are a few small spouters and geysers over there, but none are easily visible. All we saw from Okeanga, number 488, located next to the Puranga stream, was a bit of splashing, but it has been known to erupt to about 5 meters high a long time ago. Located along the walkway, there are also a number of boiling springs that look like they could erupt. The Waikite Valley is small, but we found it interesting. Tamanaroa is its main feature, an isolated spring in a gully just below the roadway. It's advertised as putting out the most water from any hot spring in New Zealand. It boils up about a meter high most of the time and puts out about 50 liters per minute. It's created its own microclimate in its gully, which means it is hard to see because of all the humidity and steam. The runoff from Tamanaroa is used not only to heat the spa pools, but some is diverted into a channel in an attempt to build a geothermal terrace. Tiki Terry, Hell's Gate, is a fairly extensive area filled with black turbulent pools, frying pans, mud pots, and a mud volcano, and lots of hot ground depositing sulfur crystals. In the Crystal Valley area, the guide sheet reports that temperatures on the ground sometimes get to the point where the sulfur will spontaneously combust, turning areas from yellow to black. There's also a noisy artificial fumarole at the entrance. Karapiti Craters of the Moon is the result of the nearby power plants. When the power plants started operating in the 1960s, the drawdown in the water caused the end of thermal activity both at Karapiti and the Wairaki Thermal Valley. This area was known for the Karapiti blowhole, a powerful fumarole that could be heard easily miles away. Now, because of the lack of water, the area has numerous collapse craters, along with a few mud pots. There's still one noisy fumarole near where Karapiti was located. We were unable to visit the Wairaki Thermal Valley, as the road and the facilities were still closed due to damage from a typhoon a few weeks earlier. Graham reported that there's not a lot to see here other than the overgrown formations and some steaming ground. But he said it's all still an interesting walk requiring over an hour to see it all. We did not visit the Wairaki terraces, as it seemed a bit too artificial. It's included here for completeness. The pools here look a lot like those at the Blah Longith, the Blue Lagoon in Iceland. That's because they have a similar origin. Both are areas formed by geothermal plant wastewater used to heat a spa.
And now we'll go on to the areas that are completely free to visit. These are listed in order of greatest to least interest in our opinion. In a future visit, we would try to allocate more of the early evening hours to visit these free areas, especially the ones in Rotorua, after the paid areas are closed. Tomanu is one place where it's possible to see free geyser activity, although it appears that the activity varies. While we saw geysers erupting on both visits, Graham spent a few rainy hours there and saw nothing erupt. Tamatapui Geyser has a varied history. It has spells of dormancy, periods of frequent small eruptions, and times when it can erupt infrequently to about 10 meters high. It's also been known to be inducible. We saw it when it was frequent. The intervals we saw on the first visit were consistent, while during the second visit, the intervals actually got shorter the longer we were there. There wasn't any change in height or duration. In 2023, we saw a second geyser, Hauni. We didn't realize it at the time, as we were so interested in getting to Tamatapui that we walked right past a full boiling pool, as shown in the bottom left photo. About a half hour later, we saw this. That activity continued for about an hour. There was so much steam and humidity that on parts of the walkway, there was a continuous warm rain coming down from the trees. But eventually the boiling stopped, the pool slowly receded, as shown in the bottom right photo. It reminded me of a mini Artemisia geyser. There's a video online from years ago showing the pool even lower and reports of the other craters here erupting well over 10 meters high. County is in the reserve, but Tomatapui is located on private land next to baths and hanging boxes. There's a fence with a faded private sign separating it from the domain proper. These photos show the man-made runoff channel that goes from Tomatapui to the bathtubs.
Tekopia is a small reserve on an alternate route between Rotorua and Arakikako, if you don't mind driving on a metalled road for several kilometers. The reserve is one of a number of thermal areas that are located along a kilometer or more of the Peiroa Fault Scarp hillside. I'd read of reports of a mud geyser there, but it was only after our second visit that I finally did figure out where the mud geyser is actually located. I thought it was located on the scarp, which is behind us in these photos, but it's actually much lower, down near the road and farmland. Fortunately, our videos show it looking inactive both visits, so we didn't miss anything. The photo of an eruption comes from an inventory of thermal features put out by the Waikato Regional Council. Both our visits to the Waitapu mud pots, north of the main thermal area, was one large soupy mud pot with islands of eruptive and explosive activity. Note how the plant life is plastered with mud but still grows right next to the edge of the feature. Kuirau Park is one of the stranger thermal areas. Much of it is a normal city park with athletic fields, playgrounds, picnic benches, and other facilities. Scattered around and among these facilities are fenced-off thermal vents, mud pots, and a few hot springs. It must not be unusual for new features to break out in recently mowed lawns, as we saw one such event in 2019 that only had a plastic orange fence around it. At the northern end is Kuirau Lake. Since the closure of the many nearby wells in the 1980s, it has been rising and flooding a larger area. This has caused the closure of some of the walkways that were still accessible in 2019. It is also not unknown for there to be large eruptions in the park. The largest took place on a Friday afternoon in the summer of 2001. For about 10 to 15 minutes, number 721, which had been a 2-meter wide warm spring, started throwing water and debris an estimated 100 meters into the air. That's steamboat-sized activity. The photo on the left is from a published report, and it shows the aftermath a day or so later. Note the temporary fencing and the cars parked on the city street at the top. What we saw last year was a large opaque pool, shown in the right photo. There have been other large eruptions in the park over the years, some up to 20 meters high. With the closure of the boreholes in the 1980s came the recovery of the hot springs. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, when the features went dry, people would fill in the dead vents and build over them. Unfortunately, the reactivated vents didn't care if a garage or house was in the way. Several city lots containing those springs have now been added to the park. On the high ground behind Whakariwa is a forest preserve of redwood trees. These trees were planted around 1900, and now it really does feel like a Northern California redwood forest. On one of the trails leading to the Tepuia Overlook is an isolated mud pot, almost hidden by the lush growth of ferns. Rotorua has a second city park with thermal features. Near the lake are the government gardens, in which there is one boiling spring, Whangapipiro, and a few muddy warm springs. The artificial Malfoy Geyser, which stopped decades ago, was also located here. Sulphur Point and the lakeshore can be combined with a visit to the government gardens. There's a trail along the shore where these sulfide springs can be seen, and that trail ends up behind the bathhouse. The Ariki Kapakapa Golf Course across from Hemo Road from the Tepuia features a number of thermal features as hazards. We also visited a golf course in Iceland with thermal features as hazards. This mud pot is visible from the outside, just a short walk from the Te Puia parking lot. Just use the walkways under the junction roundabout and cross Hemo Road. Off by itself, there is a small thermal area at Terra Roja, featuring a warm CO2-driven well, which has been turned into a fountain. It was the first thermal feature we saw in 2019, and the performance was a bit underwhelming. There are also a few other areas we missed, either due to time constraints or because we weren't sure how to get access, or they're just inaccessible. I've included them here for completeness. This slide contains the URLs for detailed references on the thermal features. Center-forming springs and geysers of the Waikato region is an 82-page inventory of thermal features, and you can download the detailed report as a PDF file. It doesn't include Rotorua or Waimangu, as those are in the Bay of Plenty region, but it is probably the closest to a Geysers of New Zealand guide out there. The New Zealand GNS is equivalent of the USGS, and their online shop has several useful books and maps for Whakawirarira and Okikorako and other places. My website also contains links to many more references and reports, maps, and videos we took, and videos I found on the web.
And now we're going to open it up to some Q&A. Is any questions out there? And while we're waiting for the questions, I have sound bites that we can play that I think are pretty interesting. The first here is the bellbird in Curacao Park. Turn up the volume. One more sound bite. We have second sound bite is the sound of little blue penguins nesting under our vacation rental at Curio Bay in the South Island. This is just a sound bite. Okay, so we have a question. Can you read it off?
Yeah, Michael was asking about the current policies on drawing back well production. And will we see an increase in geyser activity in the coming years? It's quite possible. There still seems to be features slowly reactivating, especially at Te Puia and Whakawirarira. That's about the only area, and maybe Kuira Park, are the only areas really affected by the drilling. The other areas, the drawdown was the power plants, and those aren't shutting down anytime soon. Same way with Lake Oahe. We're not going to turn off that hydroelectric power plant and drain the lake. Okay.
Any other questions? We didn't see any others.
This is actually one from me for you. So do you guys recommend an overall season of the year to visit there? Is there an advantage to certain times?
Well, the weather is going to be better in the summer.
If I were going to go back, both of our visits were in the New Zealand summer months, which of course is our winter months. If I were going to return, I probably would still return in the summer just because of the longer days. And I mean, maybe we were fortunate, but we had wonderful weather for both of our visits. The second visit was a little later. We actually got into fall, start of fall, which was lovely as well. Springtime, Graham went more in the springtime, and he got to see more of some of the non-geyser types of things. I know he saw more penguins than we did in various areas, which was pretty cool because the penguins themselves have, different patterns of nesting and things depending on time of year. Plus, there's lots more wildflowers in the spring. But we just thought summer was just absolutely lovely. And we were worried about the crowds too, but honestly, even the most crowded areas in New Zealand weren't anything like some of the crowds that you see in Yellowstone.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, the most bang for your buck as a geyser gazer to sit and take data. Koenig, definitely. We spent, I think, too much time watching Cascade and Sapphire, but we got some good intervals and it was getting so we could predict it and even walk away for a bit of time and come back and see it. And like I mentioned, the artist palette, it's had a history of, I've seen a description saying about every feature out there, it's erupting, hour-long intervals with only a minute or so duration. So there could be a lot going on that we just didn't see, which is why I think we should spend more time if we ever go back. And if you want to go for the reverse, which is the most expensive for what you saw, it might be Waiatapu, in that there's a lot of static features that are nice to see, but there's not a lot of activity. And unless you want to see Lady Knox.
And I got to say, though, I did like Waiatapu because of the colorful pools. And some of those pools are just gorgeous. I don't know. We really pretty much enjoyed just about every area.
Oh yeah.
That we paid to go see. I mean, some of those areas near the end that we didn't see, there was, I think, one that at the end that Graham mentioned wasn't really worthwhile.
Yeah, the thermal terraces, the artificial terraces, which we didn't go to anyhow. Much there.
But I think that's pretty skippable. I think we only mentioned that if you do go to see it, it's worth like maybe a half hour at most.
And it seems like Tokanu could be seasonal, but it might be, if you can spend the time there, might be worthwhile hanging around there longer if things are active.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Graham didn't see anything, which is a washout, but at least it's free. So if you go there and nothing's erupted, at least you haven't wasted any money.
Okay.
Anything else?
How difficult is the walking? Steep or easy? Like I said, you're going to see lots of steps. There's no Americans with Disabilities Act there, so there's no ramps per se. I mean, if you notice the Koroko, there were steps everywhere. Where you'd think there'd be a ramp, there were steps. Most of the hikes were short. The longest was Waimangu, and of course, with the shuttle bus, you can just ride back if you don't really want to stop anywhere. Although both times we did get off the bus to take another look at some of the spots along the trail.
Te Puia, though, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it's a pretty easy walk.
Yes.
To get to Pohutu
in those
areas.
Too.
And then there's a shuttle as well that they were taking folks around. So I think probably the most accessible areas, I would say, is Te Puia.
Yeah.
Because of the shuttle, and it's not that bad a walk at all to get out there.
Slippery, like we mentioned, the chicken wire does make a difference, especially in places on the South Island, which were quite wet. And the walkways really needed some traction devices. And I really wish they put something like that at Rift. Because it makes a big difference. But No, we were there mostly when it was dry, so I can't really comment further about that.
Another personal question for you guys. With Yellowstone, there being so many, geyser gazers, and the geyser gazers are kind of a known entity of, researching geysers. Were you kind of immediately seen like out of place in the New Zealand geyser fields, like wanting to kind of see as many geysers, or like how did it feel to be a geyser gazer in New Zealand?
I didn't really feel out of place. I think maybe if actually if one thing I might want to do differently if we went back is maybe try to talk to more people beforehand about the locals about things.
We were told by our B&B host, who used to be in the tourist business and around there, he said, we should have made some contact with a few places. They would probably be more than glad to talk with us. So my instinct is really not to go out to bother people, but he was saying, try it, at least see what happens. He knew personally, I think one of the owners, the managers of, I think, Waiotapu, because we talked with him quite a bit about, he was amused by our interest in the geysers. We stayed at that place for over a week.
Oh, and there's also a couple places where you probably know the names, Heinrich, but there was at least one place where it was a paid, you would normally have to pay to go to bathe, but we just walked up and said, hey, we're geyser gazers and we're not interested in bathing. We just want to see the geyser. And they just let us through, we didn't have to pay the admission. So that was pretty nice.
Yeah, I
And
think that was Waikite Valley, Te Manaroa, which is, again, it's a nice little trail they developed there. And it looks like because they need the water from the spring and that they are diverting it well downstream, the spring itself is preserved. So it's a nice combination. They've done it right. You're going to exploit the water, at least exploit it once it's not of much use for the features. Nothing else. And we're done.
looks like there's not any more questions coming
I think
through.
we're done.
I think we're done.
Okay. So thank you, Suzanne and Heinrich, for that presentation. And next week, as a reminder, we will have Mara Reed doing a presentation on all the monitoring and some of the science going on at Norris Geyser Basin. Thank you all for attending, and thank you again, Suzanne and Heinrich, for presenting, and we'll see you all next week.